So we're in Romans 16. It is the final chapter of Romans. And for the first 16 verses of Romans 16, Paul is writing to specific people, mentioning specific people's names. And I've decided to divide this section up into two sections. And this may not be a wise decision, but we'll find out. But as we look at this section of the letter generally, what we discover is that the church, whether it is in Rome, whether it's in Corinth, Ephesus, Colossae, whether it's in Crete, where Titus was, whether it's in any of these places that are mentioned, or whether it's in West Columbia, Texas, the church is made up of people. You guys are the church of First Baptist West Columbia. It's not this building. It's not an address. It's not a website. It's the people. And that is evident in this part of Romans. So that when Paul writes to Rome, he doesn't write to a building. When Paul writes to Rome, he does not write to a web address or an email address. When Paul writes to Rome, he does not write to a pastor necessarily, though the pastor would be included. He doesn't write to the deacons or only to the elders. He writes to the people of the church, because the church is the people. And we see in this section of Romans that the church is all kinds of people. We'll see servants, that is slaves. We'll see households. We'll see men. We'll see women. We'll see people from different parts of the world, all included in this list of people that Paul writes to. So there's not one type of person that makes up the church. The church is all of the redeemed people of God. No matter where they're from, no matter who they are, no matter whether they're a man or a woman, a Jew or a Greek, or in between, I don't know what would be in between that. No matter who they are, if they have been redeemed by Jesus, by grace, through faith, then they are a part of the church. That means if you have trusted in Jesus, you are part of the church. And if you have covenanted with us, you have joined with us, then you are a part of this church. In essence, you are this church. It's interesting that every year, a football season, or before football season, usually in the summer, I'll get a call from an advertising company. And they want to put our church name on something that has to do with the school. Really, they just want our money, which is fine. They can have it. A little bit of it, not a lot. But so for the past several years, we've paid to put our church name on the back of a T-shirt that they throw into the stands at the football game. Now, they throw these T-shirts every week, but nobody catches them. At least I don't ever catch one, so I'm just assuming that's everyone's experience. I think we sit about 6 rows too far. It's the physics of the thing. The shirt can't make it to us. So the thing I wonder is our church name really on that shirt? Does anybody have any evidence? Like I have none. I know we paid for it. It should be on the back of some of them. I know that. But I wonder, when people grab that and they look at it, maybe it's just a passing glance. They see these businesses that have advertised and support our school. We love to support the things the school does. What do they think when they see our church name? Or even you're here today. When you see the name of our church, you see our sign, you drive by our building, what do you think of? Maybe you think of me. Heaven forbid, but some people do. They think of me. And I hope that's a positive thing. Maybe they think of the building. Maybe they think of the sign. Maybe they think of the logo. But I think most people In a town like ours, they see our church name and they think, I know someone that goes to that church. And when they see that church name, they think of you. And the reason I'm willing to put our name on a shirt is not so that they'll think of our building. The reason I'm willing to put our name on a shirt is because I would be glad for people to think of you when they think of our church. I'm super proud to be a part of this church. And if I wrote a letter like this, I would want to name as many of you as I could, to commend you on how you're doing as being First Baptist Church, West Columbia. I think you're doing amazing. And Paul writes a letter to the church at Rome. He's never been there. And he says, there's some people I want to commend. And I'm just going to do 5 verses of this morning, and we'll handle the rest next week. But overall, the 2 messages will be a lot alike. The church is the people, and it's all types of people. And this building could burn to the ground. This building could be swept away in a flood. And the church would continue to exist. First Baptist Church, West Columbia, does not depend on an address or a building. First Baptist Church, West Columbia is you and me. Here's what Paul says to the Roman church. He says, I commend to you our sister Phoebe. She's a servant of the church in Cenchreae. Now, if I said that wrong, then just know you're right. So you should welcome her in the Lord in a manner worthy of the saints, and assist her in whatever matter she may require your help. For indeed she has been a benefactor of many, and of me also. Give my greetings to Prisca and Aquila. It could be Priscilla because she's called that elsewhere. Give my greetings. I'm going to call her Priscilla if you don't mind. To Priscilla and Aquila, my co-workers in Jesus, who risked their own necks for my life. Not only do I thank them, but so do all of the Gentile churches. Greet also the church that meets in their home. And greet my dear friend Epanetus, who is the first convert to Christ from Asia. Paul writes to Rome, and surprisingly, the first 2 people he commends are women. This is the reason I wanted to set this part aside from the rest, though there are more women to be named in the rest of the names. The first 2 people mentioned by Paul in the letter to the Roman church are women. Now, we are unapologetically, as a part of our doctrine as a church, complementarian in our view of the roles of men and women. And you may not know what that means, so don't worry. I'm going to do my best to explain it to you. But I want to explain that there are primarily 2 views of the relationship between the roles of men and women, at least within theology, within the church. One view is the one I said, is complementarian. I will explain that one second. The other view is called egalitarianism. Egalitarianism says that men and women are the same in every way. They have the same abilities. They have the same value. They have the same strengths and weaknesses, and they fulfill all of the same roles with respect to the church. And in the home, men and women are essentially the same. So there is no head of the home per se, but when men and women share those roles mutually and in the exact same way as each other, egalitarianism diminishes any differences between men and women. The goal of egalitarianism is noble. The goal of egalitarianism is to elevate the role of women. To say that women are valuable, and they are. That women also are image bearers made in the image of God, the same way that men are. That women have amazing abilities and creativity and strength. That women are able to carry a load many times that men might not see them as able to carry. Egalitarianism has a noble goal, and that is to elevate women, especially in the eyes of the believing community. But I would argue it is intrinsically flawed. The other view is the one I said that we hold here, that I hold as the pastor, and our doctrinal statements say that we hold as a church, and that is complementarianism. Complementarianism is the view that men and women, while being equally valuable and both being image bearers of God, are not the same. That we are different in the best way possible. So that the role of man to woman is that his strengths would complement her weaknesses. And the role of woman to man would be that her strengths would complement his weaknesses. So that when God saw Adam in the garden, he said, "It is not good that man would be alone, but I will create a helper suitable for him." Now, some people think the word helper denigrates the woman, but we know that cannot be true. Because the word helper, used to describe the woman in Genesis, is only used to describe one other thing in the Bible, and that is God himself. God is described as our help in time of need, our helper. So it cannot be, the effort is not to denigrate the woman, to call her help. It is actually to say this man needs help. And we do. We need help. So the man's strengths complement the woman's weaknesses, and the woman's strengths complement the man's weaknesses, and the man and woman are to be joined together. Therefore, a man should leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they should become one flesh. Not two of exactly the same being joined, but two different being joined, causing something new and different and amazing to happen when they come together. And so while egalitarianism may have noble goals, it has a nefarious end. Because if you say that man and woman are essentially the same, and therefore man and woman can be joined together, you are saying it's okay for two of the same to be joined. And though that was never the goal of egalitarianism, it is the net result of egalitarianism to say that if man and woman are the same and two of the same can be joined, then what is to prevent others of the same to also be joined together? You see, you've lost any ground to dispute certain views of marriage through the egalitarian position. So our complementarian view of man and woman leads us to describe the home where the man is the head of the house. Now, this phrase carries a lot of baggage. And it mainly carries baggage because of the way men have abused this position throughout history. It carries a lot of baggage mainly because of the way godly, quote-unquote, godly men have abused this position throughout history. It has come to be the belief that whatever the man says goes at home. And while that may be the eventual implication, we shouldn't deny that that is an implication of the idea. It is not the essence of the idea. The headship of the man, it says in Ephesians 5, is the same as the headship of Christ to his church. And the headship of Christ to the church is not established by his rod of iron. It's not established by his determinative will. It is not established by his effort to be satisfied in his own being. In fact, Jesus' headship of the church is established through his self-giving love. How could Jesus be the head of the body. It is because he willingly laid himself down for us. And so he is not a head who is determined to have his own way or else. He is a head who gives himself up for the good of the body. And so a man who lives out headship in the right way is a self-sacrificing, self-giving man. This type of man is one to whom the woman can easily fulfill her responsibility to love and respect him. Now, as easy it is for us to say Jesus' way is best. How do we know his way is best? Because of the way he's demonstrated his love to us. So it would be for a man who's lived that way toward his wife, for her to say, I will follow him willingly, because I know he's not going to lead me into harm. He's willingly giving himself up for me, so surely he has my best interests at heart. When marriage works that way, it works really well. The problem is we're all fallen and flawed people. There's no man who perfectly lives out Jesus to his wife and family, and there's no woman who perfectly lives out Jesus to her husband and family. And so then we have all of this mess that comes along with it. The thing we should hesitate to do is attribute the mess to the reality that this is the way we have been created. The fact is, we were created this way, and then we fell, and not the other way around. So the way of the man being strong physically and hopefully spiritually, and the woman also being strong spiritually, but having other gifts, comes together, man and woman come together, and they complement one another in a relationship that reflects Jesus' relationship to the church. This is how it should be. Consistently from Genesis to Revelation, this is the way the relationships between man and woman in marriage, this is the way their relationships are described in the Bible. There is no exception except in an effort to talk about a sinful way of being joined. So if that's true in the house, we also believe that's true in the church. That there's a complementary relationship between men and women in the church, and there are therefore roles in leadership reserved for men, not to the denigration of women. But these roles are to be self-giving, sacrificial roles. So the role of pastor and elder, as described in the New Testament, is described to be fulfilled by men. But the reason this has caused so much problem is much like the role of the man in marriage. There's a lot of baggage that is associated with sin that has caused this relationship and this role to be looked down upon. So such is the case with the role of the pastor in the church and the elders in the church. People look at that and say, well, you're giving the man all the power. You're giving the men all the decision-making capabilities. You're investing all of this in the men. What about the women? And here's the thing. While some of those implications are true, that's not the purpose of giving those roles to the men. The reason the men hold these roles is because we are supposed to be giving ourselves for the body. We're the ones who are supposed to be taking the brunt of whatever comes against the church. We are the ones who are supposed to be laying our lives down first. Now, it may be called upon for a woman to also lay her life down. In fact, women seem to be more willing to do it than men. But men are called to do it first. You see, actually, the fact that women seem to be more willing to do it, to lay themselves down, to give themselves up, it is it ought to be something that we as men are ashamed of. It ought to be something that we as men would take a stance against and say, no, we're to be the ones. We're to be the ones on the front lines. We're to be the ones bending our knees in prayer. We're to be the ones who are the first to give up our seat at the table. We're to be the ones who are most willing to be in the background. Our names are not known. We're to be the ones who are serving in the roles that are the least desired in the church. That ought to be the men. But the first ones to do that, by and large, are the women. And every church, it tends to be that way. So because we think of the pastor as the position that gets all the glory, because we think of the pastor as the position that has all the power in the church, we think of these things that, well, the man gets all the glory, the man gets all the power, we think, well, why should a man get all of that? Why shouldn't a woman get it? Well, here's the thing. If the pastor is the one that gets all the power and all the glory, then it should be a man or a woman. If that's the nature of the position, then let it go to whoever wants it. If it's about power and glory, if it's about influence and fame, then a man or a woman should equally share in that. There should be no distinction there. The thing that I would argue is that is not what the position of pastor was ever intended to be about. Though I stand here weekly before you, if I haven't been on my knees for you all week, then I probably shouldn't be standing here. If all I want to do is just tell you things and lecture you and teach you and tell you how it ought to be and not live it out before you, then I probably shouldn't be standing here. If I want to move the body without myself first having been moved, then this position should not be mine. The pastor should not be about power and influence and some degree of fame. The pastor should be the one who says, when it comes to laying their life down, I'll be the first. When it comes to giving up something for the benefit of the body, I'll be first in line. That one, he should be the pastor. And while the ladies are willing to do it, they should not be called on to do it first. And yet what we see over and over, not just today in church, but throughout time in church, the ladies, they willingly give themselves up for the body. And that's what we see in Rome. What we see in Rome is when it comes to commend people, the women are commended first. And when you think about the history of our church, there are many men who would be commended, but my list of commendable people in our church would start with women. And that doesn't mean we should reverse the roles as God intended. What it means is, men, we need to take a look in the mirror. If the women are doing their part, why aren't we? So Paul writes to Rome. The first two are women. And the first one, her name is Phoebe. Phoebe is only mentioned in this one verse in the whole Bible, and yet she seems to be very, very important. So the fact that her name isn't mentioned widely doesn't diminish her importance. Phoebe seems to be very important. And Paul writes and says, I commend Phoebe to you. I commend Phoebe to you. So here's Phoebe. Why is Paul writing about her? Because she is the messenger. The letter that we've been reading, Phoebe carried it from Paul to Rome. He put it in her hand. She carried it there and turned it over to the elders at the church at Rome. That's Phoebe. She was entrusted with the message of Romans. This letter, we would not have it if Phoebe had been untrustworthy. It wouldn't have made it. It wouldn't have been read. It wouldn't have been passed down. It wouldn't have been copied if it wasn't for Phoebe. She's the one. So Paul wrote it, and of course he deserves credit. He's the apostle. He wrote it. But you wouldn't know that if it wasn't for Phoebe. And Paul says, I commend her to you. Here's Phoebe. She is a servant at her church. Now, the word servant here causes a lot of controversy, and I love to open up controversy from the pulpit, so let's do it. The word is diakonos. Now, you don't know Greek, and neither do I, so let's not pretend that we do. But this is the word from which we get the word deacon. And the word diakonos means servant. So the word deacon also means servant. So a lot of times you think of a deacon in the church like Those are the ones that wield power. You want power in the church, you need to either be a deacon or know a deacon. That's not what a deacon was ever intended to be. The deacons are the servants. A lot of times, the word can be translated as table waiters, the people that serve others. They take care of the needs of the church. And our deacons in this church, by and large, that's what they do. They take care of people's needs. And it says, Phoebe was a diakonos. She was a servant. So a lot of times, because some men are afraid of this, and doctrinally some people don't believe in it, they're afraid to call Phoebe a deacon. But I want to be willing, and I want you to be willing, and even if I don't convince you, I want you to be willing that I'm willing to say Phoebe was a deacon at the church that she served at. A deaconess, if you will. And if a deacon is just someone who serves in some official capacity, then why couldn't a woman be a deaconess? Now, our church currently does not have any women deacons. But in our ordination process, we include the wife of any of our deacons in the process to say, hey, here's this servant role that he's taking on. It will include you. Are you willing that that would be true for you? So in some ways, we kind of overcome the system. We get deacons and deaconesses because we have servant-hearted couples who serve in our church as deacons. And here we have Phoebe, who's a servant at the very least, and maybe a deacon, with whatever implications that has. She was a servant in the church of Sincre. And honestly, I really don't know if I'm saying that right, and I'm just saying it the best I can. Look at all those vowels. How do you know what to do with that? She was a servant in this church. And so Phoebe, this is the only place she's mentioned, but this church is mentioned. It's mentioned in Acts 18. And originally I thought we were going to go and read all of Acts 18, but then I started thinking about how long that would take and then how I would get distracted and explain too many things, because that would happen. So I decided not to do that. But this church is mentioned in Acts 18, and it's cool. This place is where Paul went to get his hair cut. I'm not making that up. It says when he was in this place, Sincre, it says Paul got his hair cut because he had fulfilled a vow. Now, he went to this church on his way, on his third missionary journey. Sincre is like northwest of Athens. And so he was on his way back. So he had come down into Macedonia and Greece. I don't know if you know geography. I don't know it that well, but just imagine, let's see how you're looking at it. Italy's right here. That would be your left. And then, I don't know. That might not be right. And then Greece is going to be here for you. Or is that backwards? Okay, so Greece is here. Paul goes down into Greece and back up. And eventually he wants to come over here, right, to Rome. He does it on his third missionary journey. He goes back to Jerusalem. That's what he wrote to them. He said, I'm going back to Jerusalem. So just imagine, he just got his hair cut. He's written this letter. I mean, could it be that Phoebe cut his hair? I don't know, maybe we're taking it a step too far. Maybe she did. I don't know. Maybe she was a stylist. Who knows? Maybe she had purple hair. You know? Who knows? Like tattoos and stuff. I don't know. Who knows? But here's Phoebe in this church. Paul goes there. He's fulfilled his vow. His hair is cut. He's on his way back to Jerusalem. And he says, hey, I've got a letter that needs to get to Rome. I need a trustworthy person. Who in this church could do it? Guess who it was? It was Phoebe. She can do it. She's a servant-hearted woman. She would give herself up. If it costs her her life, she would take this letter, give it to her. And so they do. Paul does. He gives her the letter. She takes it. You say, you're reading into that too much. How could I be? That has to be what happened. So in the church where Paul got a haircut, he finds Phoebe, who is a servant of the church. And he sends her on with the letter. So what is it about Phoebe? Well, before we get too far, what is it about Phoebe? But what is it also about the next woman who's mentioned? In verse 3, he says, give my greetings to Priscilla and Aquila. These two are also mentioned, guess where? Acts 18. The same exact chapter. Now, Priscilla and Aquila had been acquainted with Paul before. In fact, Priscilla and Aquila helped Paul make a living. You know, maybe, if you've been in church long enough, that Paul was a what? What was his vocation outside of being an apostle? He was a tent maker. How do we know that? Because he worked with Priscilla and Aquila, and guess what they were? Tent makers. We have these two who helped provide for Paul. Guess what Phoebe had also done? Helped provide for Paul. It says that she has been a benefactor of many. Talking about Phoebe and me also. So here we have two of Paul's benefactors. That is people who supported him financially. Priscilla and Aquila had worked alongside of him, not just in the ministry, but in tent making. These are some of the most important people to Paul. Two of them are women. And the interesting thing about Priscilla and Aquila in Romans 16 is this is the reverse of the way they're mentioned everywhere else in the Bible. So in Acts 18, it's always Aquila and Priscilla. The man is mentioned first. And you think, a man named Aquila? Just get over it. Yes. And his wife, Priscilla. And Aquila and Priscilla, they were instrumental in the ministry of a man named Apollos. Apollos came and he preached. And Priscilla and Aquila heard him preach. And it was amazing, except for he got the gospel wrong. So here we have a great orator who presents part of truth, and they say, this guy is useful to the kingdom. So rather than condemning him for getting it wrong, it says they took him aside and discipled him, so that when he went on, many were converted through the ministry of Apollos. So we know of Apollos because of Priscilla and Aquila. If it hadn't been for them, you would only know of him as someone who was a heretic. But because they heard him and said, here's a man who's close to the kingdom, they discipled him. He became a great proclaimer of the gospel. Apollos owes his ministry to Priscilla and Aquila. And in many ways, Paul, the apostle, owes his ministry to Priscilla and Aquila. Here they are. They provide, they disciple, and they travel with Paul. They're his companions, his friends. I don't know how you think of Paul, but I hope you think of him as just another, in a way, he's just a guy. And he needs friends. And so here we have Paul traveling with them. I mean, what are they doing, like on their journeys? What do you think? You know, they probably were playing cards. Or watching movies. Probably not movies, right? They were reading together. They were discussing things. They were enjoying one another's company. They have a relationship. Paul with this married couple. Paul, a single man. A married couple, one of the most important people in his life. How much did he learn from them? In our Sunday school class, we've been talking about, our class is a marriage class. We've been talking about marriage. And how did Paul learn all these lessons about marriage if he didn't have godly married people that he was surrounded by? And here is one of those couples, Priscilla and Aquila. So he says, give my greetings to them. But like I said, in Acts 18, everywhere else, Aquila is always mentioned first. But here, in Romans 16, Priscilla is mentioned first. You say, well, maybe it's just a coincidence, but it's not. The only reason you would list the wife first is if you were doing so intentionally. So, it is true that while men retain headship in the home and the church, we ought not to be offended when a woman gets the credit, when a woman is recognized, when a woman receives the acclaim. And here's the thing, men are troubled by that. We are. We think in an ungodly way that headship means we get the power. Headship means we get the acclaim. Headship means it's about us. But a proper view of headship does not require any of that. So I think, and I am reading into the text a little bit, but I think the one who would have been most proud of Priscilla would have been her husband, Aquila. he would have been so happy for her. Not that she had usurped him. Not that she had taken over headship of the home, but that she is being praised for something good that she's done. I think a proper view of marriage, one of the most rewarding things is for someone to honor our spouse. For someone to say something good about our spouse. If you say something good about Danielle, my wife, that makes me a lot more happy than you saying something good about me. In fact, if you say something good about me, I absolutely don't know what to do with that. You want to have an awkward interaction with me? Try paying me a compliment. I have no idea what to do with you. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to react. I've got all this baggage from my whole life of saying you should be humble. You shouldn't accept compliments. It's all about Jesus. And so I'm going to do something really awkward. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, somebody tried to compliment me. I was so awkward with them, I had to text them later and say, I'm so sorry that I couldn't accept your compliment. I don't know what to do with it. But here's the thing I don't struggle with. If you want to compliment Danielle, you want to compliment one of my kids, you want to praise them, I'm with you. And it doesn't have, whatever it is, I agree with you. And I just want to tell you, you haven't praised her enough yet. And you haven't noticed yet enough about how amazing my kids are. I think the one who would have been so glad for this, he wouldn't have been cast off by it at all, would have been Aquila. Of course my wife deserves credit. Of course my wife deserves praise. And I think a man who has a proper view of headship, both at home and the church, would also have that view toward the women of the church and the women of his household. Look, as your pastor, there's something that pleases me way more than someone praising me, and that's when they praise you. When the only praiseworthy person is the pastor, something is wrong at church. When the only one anyone mentions is the pastor, when he is the headliner, when he's the authority, when he's the reason you go, he's the only reason you're there, he's the only reason you say, something's wrong at church when that happens. But when they praise you, gosh, that's really amazing. And so Paul writes, I commend Phoebe, I commend Priscilla and Aquila. So why are they commended? Very quickly, it's just two things. One is they work, and the other is they serve. Really, those are the same things, but elements of the same. So maybe you don't want to distinguish between work and service, but some work is not service, some service is not work. So he says, Phoebe's a servant. Priscilla and Aquila, they are co-workers or co-laborers in Jesus. Priscilla and Aquila, they've risked their lives for me, laying down their lives. They're self-giving. So they work and they serve, thinking not of themselves, giving up their lives, and then they facilitate the growth of the church. So then they are not just workers to no end, nor are they servants to no end, but they work and serve to facilitate the life of the church. He says, also say hi to the church that meets in Priscilla and Aquila's house. And I guarantee you, when they went to meet at their house, most of the work for that meeting fell on Priscilla. We have a small group in our house, and when people come over, we are all motivated to get the house ready for people to come. But the motivator in our house, the reason we're all motivated is because Danielle motivates us. By whatever means necessary. We are motivated because we have someone to motivate us. And if Priscilla and Aquila's house is anything like mine, the church that met in their home, the reason there was a home to be met in, and the reason there was a place for everyone to sit, and everybody had a snack and a drink, and everybody was comfortable, and the house smelled like it should. The reason for that, I'm just guessing, but it was probably Priscilla. And so Paul says, right, I just want to commend Priscilla. Tell everybody that meets in their home, hi. Epaenetus meets there. Tell him hi. He was the first convert in Asia. But guess what? He's less important than these two ladies. I just want to commend them. Paul writes specifically to commend them. And I want to commend the women of our church. Our church is what it is in large part because of the women of our church. Even me standing here preaching to you is because of ladies who pray for me. It's because of women who support me. It's because I have many who have been a benefactor to me and many others, and most of them are women. Now, I love the guys of our church too, and you guys support me and pray for me, and I know you do. But you get a lot of kudos, and I just want to take a break and say that if it were not for the women of this church would not be here. And while headship may be reserved for the men, the head would die without the body. Look, Jesus doesn't depend on us for life. We depend on him for life. But the man and the woman are not like that. While we're very similar to that relationship in one valuable way, we're very different. But it's not good for men to be alone. So God found it suitable to create for us a helper. One who comes alongside us like the Holy Spirit, like God himself. And guess what, men? You're not going to make it without him. Our church wouldn't make it without the ladies who lay down their life for the ministry of our church. And I just want to commend you. I want you to be encouraged. I want to just ask you to continue. This church is for everybody. All people, men, women, all nationalities, ethnicities, all people. And if you didn't know, the engine of our church is the ministry of the ladies of this church. And it's amazing. Let's pray. God, we just thank you for your word to us. And I thank you for women who lay down their lives over and over again so that people will know Jesus. They're trustworthy servants. They work many times in ways that are unseen. They are self-sacrificing. They're loving and gentle and merciful and spiritual and amazing. And I thank you for the gift that they are to me. I thank you for the gift that they are to our church. And God, I pray that I would be a pastor that's worthy of that. That I wouldn't let them beat me to the front of the line when it's time to give of myself. God, help me to be the servant you've called me to be, following in their example. And God, make more of us. I pray, God, that you would raise up more men and women who would self-sacrificingly follow you so that more and more and more people can know of Jesus. I pray that in Jesus' name.